Didier Ottinger is the Deputy Director of the Musée National d'Art Moderne at the Centre Pompidou and has curated this wonderful exhibition for us here at the Gallery of Modern Art, Surrealism, the Poetry of Dreams. By a short introduction to Didier's work, he has, as I said, he's the Deputy Director at the Centre Pompidou, at the National Art Museum there, and is a senior curator, a very well-known curator in France for several exhibitions, and I'll just refer to a few of them. Before coming to the Pompidou in 1995, he was the director of the Modern and Contemporary Art Museum in Sable d'Olonne, which is in on the western coast of France. And in 2005-2006, he was a guest curator at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. He's curated numerous exhibitions, too many to mention here, but I'll just mention some of them. Recently, he has, starting probably in around 2002, he did an exhibition on Max Beckmann at the Pompidou that travelled to the Tate and also to MoMA in New York. He did another exhibition, Parade, Portrait of the Artist as Clown, which was presented at the Galerie Nationale at the Grand Palais in Paris, as well as in Ottawa. Futurism in Paris, an explosive avant-garde at the Centre Pompidou in 2008. And last year he curated an exhibition at the Pompidou called Dreamlands, which I think demonstrates what a maverick curator Didier is, having covered not only the very foundational avant-garde movements, he's also curated exhibitions which consider much broader, aspects of contemporary culture. Dreamlands was an exhibition which looked at the the history of the world fairs, contemporary theme parks. It embraced Las Vegas in the 50s and 60s, and also considered 21st century Dubai, and thinking about the profound transformation that these exhibitions and events have made in our relation to the world, our concepts of geography, time and history, and our ideas about the original, the reproduction, and about art and non-art. The history of the avant-garde is something that Didier is extremely well-versed in, and in his exhibition he's curated for us here, you'll see the depths of his knowledge of surrealism through the very careful and interesting construction of the story of surrealism from its very beginnings through to a much later period than most of us are familiar with, the period of the 1960s up until the death of André Breton. Didier is also, of course, very familiar with contemporary art, and in 2009 he was one of three commissioning curators of an exhibition in Paris, a triennial exhibition of contemporary art, La Force de l'Art, the Force of Art, the next instalment of which is next year, but it was an exhibition that really was a survey of contemporary art in France, and I think that interest in contemporary culture and contemporary art, as well as the historical avant-gardes, makes Didier an extremely interesting person to be speaking to us today about surrealism and how it might connect to our contemporary world, as well as the actual details of the history. So, but without further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce Didier Ottinger to speak with us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Miranda, and I want to express again my pleasure to have been lucky to be able to work with the team of the Museum of Brisbane. From the very beginning, it was a very exciting project, and I was very pleased to find here some open-minded team and very daring curators who were able to build the kind of exhibition you can see or you have seen here, which is something which has never been done at such a scale. I mean, the confrontation between the film and the photos and the painting, the drawings. It's something very dynamic that I was expecting to do since quite a long time. And luckily, I met this museum and all the team, and I was allowed to do that. So thank you again for all of you. I will talk about today, it's night in France. It's 4 o'clock in the morning. I would like to talk today of mythology. Mythology is a theme which is for me very important in relation to surrealism, and I wrote a book some years ago about this particular topic. And this story of the relation between surrealism and mythology will be underlined by the relation of a specific artist I'm also very interested in is André Masson. It will be probably for many of you a real discovery to see the work of André Masson in this exhibition. We own at the Musée National d'Art Moderne quite an important collection of work by Masson, and in the collection you will see him from the very beginning. The very first painting you'll see, in fact, will be by Masson, and the very last is also a painting by Masson. So it's un fil d'Ariane. It's a way to cross the exhibition through his own evolution. This is a painter for me who is not well enough recognized, and I'm hoping in the future to be able to make a retrospective of his work. So let's start. Can a work of art change the world? The surrealists, disciples of Mallarmé and Valéry, wanted to believe in this utopian. Then the absurdity of the war and the tidal wave of stupidity and cruelty that stepped over Europe made them doubt everything, and first of all, the power of the mind and his works. For them, Dada incarnated this doubt, this collapse of their certainties. Turning away from a nihilism that by its very nature could only last a short time, the surrealists placed their belief and found hope in the October Revolution. In creating a new avant-garde, they wanted to reconcile the heritage of Marx with that of Rimbaud. This double lineage was embodied in a program that was repeated over and over again: change the world and change life. For a decade, the program stressed the offer of Das Kapital rather than the one of Le Sonnet des Voyelles. The Surrealist Revolution dreamed of bringing down the ivory towers isolating art from the hubbub of the world. The Surrealists wanted to call the artist back to his social and political responsibilities. This imperative was at the origin of the break of the Surrealists with their Dadaist past. From the spring of 1921 on, André Breton has decided to impose what he would later call an almost complete change in outlook on the activity of the Dadaist group. This change in outlook aimed at bringing Dada's action into the ethical domain. The first act of his new program took the form of a trial against Barès, an ex-figure of the literary avant-garde who had been an hero for the young Breton. Late in his life, Barès has become a fervent proselytizing patriot. In that, the Barès trial, here you find an announcement for this trial, who was of course a parody. In the Barès trial, posed the question of the poet's political responsibility. It can be seen as the founding act of Surrealism. In 1927, 3 years after the official foundation of the movement, the question of political commitment caused the first of the crises that was to punctuate its history. Breton stressed the need to bring Surrealism closer to the Communist Party. Antonin Artaud and André Masson resisted this idea. I quote André Masson: "Artaud and I had until then always refused to join any political party, and it was the cause of a deep conflict. Artaud's fierce opposition laid him a victim of the first of the surrealist purges. In November 1926, his exclusion from the movement, as well as of Vitrac and Soupeau, was pronounced. These dissensions did not impede the politicization of surrealism. In 1927, Aragon, Breton, Éluard, Perret, and Unique joined the Communist Party. The second manifesto of surrealism made revolutionary commitment a diktat that provoked a new schism. Anticipating this new break about the end of the year 1928, André Masson distanced himself from Breton. The painter attributed this estrangement to an incompatibility in moral and behavior, and to Breton's authoritarian manner, which he had begun to find unbearable. When seen in relationship with Masson's art, these splits take on new meaning. Unlike the poet that would stay within the group after the 1929 crisis, Breton, Aragon, Éluard, Perret, Crevel, Masson has never participated in the Dada adventure. Just after the war, While the future surrealists were giving a triumphant welcome to Tristan Tzara in Paris and converting to Dadaism, Masson chose to work within a modern tradition that led him to reinterpret the Cubist heritage. This personal trajectory is enough to justify the painter break with the Surrealism that was faithful to its Dadaism past and persisted in seeing art as merely a lamentable expedient. This is a word used by André Breton himself. Masson's past immunized him against the recurrent favors of iconoclasm which affected Surrealism. Masson believed in painting, in its power of concrete action on the real. While, with his automatic drawings and his sand painting, he produced an art that was for him, I quote, corresponded exactly with the Surrealist imperatives, he did not understand and suffered from the indifference to his work among the movement's poets. A new quotation from Masson, "I was too much the painter to be at my place in the Surrealist milieu." It would be erroneous to take this "I was too much a painter" as a tendency toward an autonomous art that was indifferent to the 1920s Surrealist program of political commitment. A more accurate interpretation of these words would surely be, "I believe too much in painting and in its power to transform the world to see it merely, as the Surrealists did, as an expedient unfit to fill any revolutionary role." At the end of 1928, this conviction drove Masson further away from the Surrealism for which the only chance of contributing to a change in the world order depended on unconditional political commitment, forgetting Rimbaud in favor of Marx at that time. For Masson, the crisis which divided Surrealism in 1929 is about the issue of automatism. The technique is seen as a failure because the abstraction of the works produced by automatism condemns them to be the only expression of an autistic subjectivism that is incompatible with authentic revolutionary aims. This crisis and failure and those of surrealists incapable of creating an art with a social and collective vocation and instead shooting their words up in a new ivory tower. In order to escape from the freight of this lofty isolation and socially sterile subjectivism, without disowning the attainment of automatism, Masson chose Jung against Freud. I quote him again. "One day, I reproached the surrealists with being demagogical in their view of the unconscious. I was particularly interested in Jung's conception of the unconscious, which is more collective than Freud's. The massacres," this is one of these drawings, "that Masson drew from 1931 on constitute a Jungian answer to the question of automatism. The iconography, the scene of primitive violence, is based on universal instincts and drives. Masson's figures are schematic, and repeated with obsessive fascination. They emerge as archetypes. Masson, in the massacres, is seeking the point at which spontaneous graphic expression converges with free impulse, the automatism of the hand as much as that of the mind. Erotism and violence are both present, most often intertwined. One of the first massacres has the title Scène sadique, confirming Sade as the governing source of inspiration for the works. In 1928, Masson undertook the illustration of the divine Marquise Justine. There is a drawing of this serial in this exhibition. The same year, he conceived the drawing that accompanied the first edition of Georges Bataille's L'Histoire de l'œil, The Story of the Eye, a work extremely influenced by Sade. Looking back on this time when he was still trying to save automatism from drifting off into subjectivity, he opposed subjectivity to Sadian compulsion. Quote again of Masson, "The Dionysian feeling is more permanent than automatism, for automatism is absent from consciousness." The consciousness insisted on by Masson takes the form of a reflexivity that enters into his choice of images, images intended as universal because they draw their strength from primitive instincts. The massacres date from the same time as Civilization and Its Discontents, the book in which Sigmund Freud describes the different stage, rites, and symbolic practices which founded life in community. Freud evokes the time before any social organization, during which, I quote Freud, the dangerous individual desire for aggression was not yet controlled and regulated by the creation within oneself of an authority watching over the self like a garrison over a conquered city. Jungian by their status as universal archetypes, archaic in the sense defined by Freud, the massacres are indeed the first mythological works by André Masson. Masson took his distance from Surrealism in 1928 because of what he considered as a betrayal on the part of Breton and his followers, a betrayal which, through their unconditional political commitment, testified to their loss of conviction as to the revolutionary potential of art. Like a number of dissidents and ex-members excluded from the movement, Masson drew close to the review Documents, founded by Georges Bataille and Karl Einstein in 1929. The review's subtitle, Archaeology, Fine Art, Ethnography, announced the important place in it that the protagonist of the new French ethnology occupied. Rivet, Griot, Scheffner, and Léris wrote articles regularly. Thanks to their theoretical and methodological contributions, Documents become a fertile ground for reflection on the socialization of art, a theoric space attached to its use value. This ethnological reading, applied to art, offers a solution to the aporia into which Surrealism has fallen due to its incapacity to relate artistic creation with social and political concerns. For the ethnologist who wrote for Documents, Marcel Mauss was the key theoretical inspiration for their discipline. Mauss has been one of the founders of the Institute of Ethnology, where most of them have studied. Alfred Métro transmitted the enthusiasm he had felt during Marcel Mauss' classes to Georges Bataille. Although Mauss was a more than modest contributor to Documents, he only published one article in the issue in homage to Picasso. His theory constituted one of the theoretical bases of the review. As both spiritual and parental heir to Durkheim, Mauss ceaselessly trusts the founding and federating values of social order. As the link inherited from the religion system slowly crumbled away, Mauss looked for collective transhistoric values using ethnological skills and methods. In contrast to the evolutionism of the English school of ethnology embodied by James Fraser, Mauss asserted the principle of a survival within modern society of a mythological and symbolic driving force belonging to archaic culture. Applied systematically, simplified in a way that would be contested by Mauss himself, his ideas were reinterpreted by the artists, writers, and researchers who contributed to Documents. Karl Einstein, the review's principal theorist, an eminent historian of modern and primitive art, adopted the ethnological point of view when he stated that we must treat this primitive art historically and no longer consider it only from the unique aesthetic point of view and taste. Taking as his own the principle of social contextualization for modern works, he gave the title Masson Étude ethnologique, Masson Ethnological Study, to his essay on the artist. Einstein established the link claimed by Masson between automatism and Jungian archetypes. I quote Einstein, "We are witnessing the return of mythological creation, the return of psychological archetypes." Interpreted with the fervor of Georges Bataille, the ethnological approach to art led to a crusade against autonomous aesthetic values and reduced artwork to the rank of ethnological documents. This is the title of a review, which is also a real program. For the artists and writers of surrealist tendency associated with the review document, it was Georges Bataille who made them aware of Marcel's most analysis of socialization rituals. For Bataille, festive activity, gratuitous giving, potlatch, and sacrificial ceremonies became comparable in their underlying reasoning with artistic practice itself. In the intellectual context which document developed, the massacres became laden with collective and mythical meanings. The drawings were associated with slaughterhouses, those places of modern sacrifice that Breton went to with the photographer Élie Lothar. These pictures, also present in the exhibition, would appear in documents accompanied by an essay by Georges Bataille, where the slaughterhouse became, I quote Bataille, the modern version of the ancient sacrificial temple relegated to the age of our culture. Mos's search for a palliative based on the anti-evolutionism for northern religions convinced the contributors to document that it was necessary to regenerate mythic thoughts. André Basson was the first among the surrealists to draw his inspiration from the vast mythological repertory. He perceived in his huge score of tales and legends the possibility of reconciling the surrealist obsession with man's origin and a social and political expression of art. This is another massacre, and this is another work by Masson, a saint painting. From 1932 on, explicit or coded evocation of Ariadne, this is one of the painting, become more and more frequent in his work, along with reference to Pasiphae succumbing to Zeus in the form of a white bull. While the bestial coupling of Pasiphae and Zeus give him new subject of Sadian inspiration, Ariadne, whose trouble in her life is revealed in the legend, seems to be the perfect surrealist heroine. Ariadne guarded the labyrinth and its secrets. The thread that she gave to Theseus, representing reason, pitted against the darkness of the Minotaur, guided him through the winding labyrinth, just as Freud's understanding dreams allowed surrealist poets to delve into the obscurity of the human psyche. Ariadne is Freud's forerunner in that she is not afraid of affronting the abysses of the irrational. Her self-assurance had its sources in the compassion and secret love she felt for her half-brother, the Minotaur. Like Western culture, Ariadne has left herself bedazzled by the bright clarity of the argument of Theseus, son of Athens, that font of philosophy. Theseus seduced Adrienne and then abandoned her on the Isle of Naxos. There, alone, she was saved and comforted by Dionysus. According to Friedrich Nietzsche's version, Dionysus murmured in her ear, "I am your labyrinth," reminding her with the simple phrase of the happy days before her passion to Theseus. Paintings and drawings by Masson celebrate Ariadne, the benevolent guide of labyrinth nights. Thus thread leads ever closer to the wisdom of the Minotaur, the custodian of secret from archaic times, buried mystery of the human soul. As Ariadne's thread is rolled up, it became the lineament of the automatic art, touching on the unconscious. I quote Masson again, "I often lost my way by wandering from the path in a source of creation." In March 1933, this is some example of how this theme of the thread given by Ariadne to guide through the Minotaur could have been interpreted in different works of the Surrealist time. This is an automatic painting by Masson. This is a work by Miro, where the line is like that. This is a work by Jean Harpe, literally made with a rope. This is a painting by Picabia of the late 20s, when the shape and the lines are very important. Same thing in Picasso, here, the same period. And the line, maybe, of Ariane can be found in this representation of the exhibition made in New York City in 1942. It was a design made by Marcel Duchamp, who put these strings around the exhibition space. In March 1933, the publisher Thériade decided to create a new review. He called on Georges Bataille and André Masson, who immediately decided to name it Minotaur. I quote Masson, "The title having been found, I was asked to do the front cover, since I was familiar with the Greek words of mythology, and I had often drawn Minotaurs. Then, because of Picasso's notoriety, Picasso was asked to do it." After Picasso, André Breton joined the Minotaur team, making the publication the new official organ for Surrealism. Taking control of Minotaur, Orthodox Surrealism injected the mythological values associated with this tutelar figure. Through the article and studies devoted to mythical subjects that frequently appeared in the review, the issue of mythology that has been introduced at the beginning of Surrealism with Chirico works attracted new attention. This culminated at the end of the 30s with André Breton's interest in the myth of the Grand Transparent, one to which Matta gave visible form. I don't know, this is some Minotaur by Picasso, this is a collage, this is the Minotaur by Masson, who is also in the exhibition. I don't know if this guy is here. This culminated, This interest in mythic thought would be the most precious gift that Surrealism in exile would bring to the United States. The exhibition that Breton would organize in New York in 42, you have seen the image, would be devoted to, this is the real title of the exhibition, it is known by the historian as First Papers of Surrealism, but the real title of the exhibition and the content of the catalogue is the following. The survival of certain myths and other myths which are still taking form. The issue of myths reached its peak in the return to Europe with the Surrealist exhibition of 1947, presented in Paris at the MAG Gallery. Its physical and symbolic center was a room devoted to, this is in the catalogue quotation, a being, a category of being, or an object susceptible of being gifted with mythical life. And you have in the exhibition one of these mythical objects, which is the table wolf by Victor Bronner. André Breton assigned himself the mission of, I quote, reconciling surrealism as a mode of creation, a collective myth, with a wider movement of man liberation. Georges Bataille had continued the reflection on mythology began in the page of documents. His work with Masson on this topic led to the publication that they made together of a book titled Sacrifice in 1936. For the conception of the images of the collection Sacrifice, Masson took his inspiration from the Golden Bough, the English ethnologist James Fraser's compilation of a great founding myth of civilization. Masson's engraving are the figures of the dying gods, Mithra, Orpheus, Christ, the Minotaur, Osiris. A year after the publication of Sacrifice, Masson, again with Bataille, came up with a figure that became the emblem for a new review on utopia, grandiose in his ambition and paltry in the context. The review, aimed at laying new foundation for European society, was being corrupted by the rise of fascism. The figure was Acéphale. I don't know where is it. No. Acéphale. A new myth to which Masson gave a number and a features and characteristic of the ancient Greek divinities. I quote Masson again, I see him at once as headless. Automatically, with one wand, the left one, he flourished a dagger. With the other, he made an inflamed heart. All that is very well, but what is to be done with this belly? No matter, it will contain the labyrinth. This is what you see here in the image. The labyrinth, the railing sign of Acéphal's contributors, is at the heart of the work of mythological inspiration painted and drawn by Masson at the end of the 30s. The one he painted in 1938, you have to come back to it. This one appears to be the talisman of his art. The labyrinth was at the crossroad where his personal trajectory meets the path of his social and poetic project. I quote again, Masson. It is rigorous. At first, it seems chaotic, and then one sees that there is an order. That's why the myth of the labyrinth occurs very early in my work and has continued to do so ever since. Between rigor and chaos, the labyrinth is a metaphor for André Masson's art. Along among the surrealist painters, he has zealously learned from the cubists. His apprenticeship coats him the discipline and constructive rigor that his painting, including the most spontaneous, loose one, always show. The labyrinth, like his art, is raison madness. Masson is in the double of Daedalus, the architect of these corridors. Like him, he knows how to discreetly impose order on the madness and reason. In Masson 1938 painting, the Minotaur is a labyrinth himself, as well as one who decided the metamorphoses affecting all those lost in its twists and turns. The metamorphoses derive from Daedalus' structure, of which just the name resumes Masson's poetic intentions. Around the Minotaur's genital, what you see, he painted the four elements that had already been seen in his 1925 painting, which lay the foundation for his future art. The labyrinth is the place wherein opposites are joined and the order and kingdoms separated by reason are reconciled. It is the refuge of a dream, the living proof of the possible reconciliation of God and man, of the cohabitation in the same creature of human reason and animal desires. The labyrinth is the temple built by Masson to the philosopher poets who had inspired his art. Heraclitus, the prophet of instability and movement in the world, Empedocles, visionary of Chimeria, brought together by love. The Second World War forced André Breton to seek refuge in the United States. Freed from the pernicious atmosphere of a Europe that was succumbing to fascism, his mythological inspiration underwent a mutation. I quote him again. Metaphysical questioning, a theme that I have explored before my time in America, has been transformed by this sensation of true possession of nature that I had never anywhere felt so strongly and continuously before. This is one painting made by Masson during the exile in the United States. Thus, succeeding to the universal Jungian figures of the 30s came a mythology inspired by a new context in which his work was now developing. I quote again, "When I settled in the countryside in Connecticut, I was very struck by the climate. I found myself in almost virgin country. Nature's strength impressed me enormously. It was the natural forces that I felt there, as I have nowhere else. Among these natural forces, the fecundity of the land in America fascinated and frightened him at the same time." Quote again, "It is in the United States that I decided on painting in a way that I shall ambiguously call Chtonian, an attempt to capture subratenous force. This telluric power was to be embodied in another mythological figure totemic for the American period in Masson's work, the Chimeria." Here, this is a seed which is exploding. This is a seed of I don't remember what, but this is typically the type of painting which was inspired by this dynamism of the American earth. Alors, chimeria. Chimeria, a lion in front, a dragon behind, and a goat in between, as it was described by Homer, the fable animal was descended from Gaia, Mother Earth, for the ancient Greeks. Living among men, the chimeria is the last witness of a time dating before the cosmic order, a time when the animal, vegetable, and mineral was not distinct kingdoms of metamorphoses and hybrid beings, a time that the surrealists constantly drew on as a source of creative power. Here you see one work which is also in the exhibition here. This is the Chimeria by Max Ernst. This is a work quite important because it belonged for years and years to André Breton. Masons are alive and their meeting point in the figure of the chimeria. As a symbol of telluric power, it became an allegory for the fertility of American soil and fascinated Masson. The chimeria was the basic for his inspiration in the cycle of paintings about the germination of wheat, the painting you saw before, through which Masson wanted to give new life to the ancient Indian mythology. That's what I show you here, especially here. This is a wall painting by Diego Rivera, the Mexican painter, which is an illustration of this mythology of the regeneration and of the cycle of life and death. And you see the dead people and the ground who are giving birth to the corn and to the new generation through precisely the warmness of the sun. This is one of the chimeria, which was made also by Max Ernst in 1925. And let's see. Ever since the start of Surrealism, the chimeria has acted as an emblem. The first Surrealist work, Les Champs Magnétiques, written by André Breton and Philippe Soupeau in 1919, juxtaposed heterogeneous text fragments like as the lion, the goat, and the dragon are united to make the image of a chimeria. The painters and poets of the movement collected chimerial technique like the cadavresque, what you see here, which was the method they would use the most frequently. The lasting success of collage among the surrealists is due to the same reasons. Their poetics was so deeply identified with the figure of the chimeria that its image became up again and again in the works of surrealist painters. From 1928 to 1944, Max Ernst developed in 4 times at the same time. It figures in numerously work by Masson in America. Victor Brunner embarked upon what he himself called his chimeria period. Toward the end of the war, André Breton, interpreted the myth of the chimeria in his book Arcane 17. This novel was written under the sway of Mélusine, a woman snake, mistress of telluric powers. Ariane, the Minotaur, the chimeria, do this period in this imagery sum up the role in mythology in André Masson's work. Masson denied it categorically. I have been a student of mythology since the start, he said. Without having recourse to the traditional figures of mythology, from the period of the forest, there is one also in the first gallery in this exhibition, at the beginning of the 20s on, Masson's art show himself to be imbued with mythic consciousness. The idea of a continuous cycle from death to life through suggestion of metamorphosis and the hope of regeneration shadows his representation of isolated burial vaults lit by the ray of sunshine filtering through the undergrowth. There is some painting literally showing this sun going through the forest and giving birth to grave. From the memory of the tombs of dead soldiers to the rotting corn seed reborn in the American soil, Masson never ceased celebrating the gravest, most secret mystery of ancient Greece. In the secrecy of the Eleusis sanctuary, this myth told of the cycle of rebirth, a mystery proclaimed by the initiated, which brought Dionysius and his dancing procession of bacchant to ecstatic joy. Thank you. There is some images I didn't comment, so this is here by Matta, one of the very first representation of the myth of the Grand Transparent at the end of the 30s. Matta was very inspired by Marcel Duchamp, and he thought that the real subject of the large glass was precisely a creature coming from another dimension. So Breton asked him to give a form, a shape, to this Grand Transparent, and it was one of his drawings. Here, this is a representation of Le Grand Transparent made by Herold, and it appears like that as a sculpture in the 1947 exhibition in La Galerie Mag, just to emphasize the importance of this theme, of this mythical creature. This is the same object. This is the representation of a fourth element, one painting you can see in the exhibition, where Masson expressed for the first time what was his real goal, and he said, for the first time, I tried to introduce philosophy in painting, and in fact, this is a representation of the creation of the world, something he was inspired by the pre-Socratic philosopher, Greek philosopher. No, this is autre chose. Harp. This is about this idea of the point of origin, which is something always very important in the poetic of the Surrealism. This is what finally Jean Harpe is seeking all his life long. This is the subject of a painting by Tanguy, Le Royaume des Mers, like Breton would say later on. So this is probably about the Sadian relation. It's called the Rope. Same idea with another painting by Magritte. And Adrian, which was introduced in the Surrealist world by the early painting of De Chirico. This is precisely the man who introduced the idea of mythology in the mind of a Surrealist. This is a painting by Masson titled La Pythie. You see on the down part and left part of the image a creature which is inspired. This is the one who predicts the future in the temple of Apollo. And this is also a work by, I don't know how many. Will not show you everything, but you'll admit. These images are quite also interesting because this is a work by Mark Rothko. You know him with different type of painting, but he was of course very concerned by what was brought to the US by the Surrealists in exile, and particularly this conception of a native world, of an original time in the world. And this is very close in spirit to Tanguy, for instance, this type of painting, small creature. And here this is a painting by, if I remember, Newman. It must be Pagan Void. So this also emphasizes the relation between mythology for the new generation of American painters and Savigno and Rothko. But I don't know. There is probably hundreds of images. I will not show you them. So if you have some question, of course, I will be pleased to answer to any of them.
We do have time for a couple of questions. I'll just pass the microphone over to you.
Thank you very much for a very inspiring chat. I just want to know how much influence did this impart upon Salvador Dali as he came a little later, and were some of his drawings or paintings that I've seen are not dissimilar to some of the ones that I've seen here tonight, or today rather.
Yeah.
Or tonight in France.
Yeah, he played a very crucial role. He just came to Paris at the precise time where the Surrealist was in a real crisis. The crisis was to articulate the relation between the interior model and the reality. For years and years, Surrealism has been denied the reality. It was the statement, one of the strongest statement of the first manifesto. We have to refer exclusively to the interior model. We have to deny the real. We have to fight against realism. But in 1929, there is the second manifesto, which is an injunction addressed to all the surrealists to their commitment in the rank of the Communist Party. And of course, when you became a communist, you have to deal with the real, with the materialism, which is the philosophical basis of the Marxism. So the surrealist was lost and had to find a solution to articulate what were their initial expression of the self and the real. And suddenly, as a miracle, Dali appeared and came to Paris precisely that year in 1929 and expressed a new conception of art, which was the paranoia critique. And the paranoia critique was inspired by the theory of psychoanalysts and by the definition of paranoia, which is the projection of the obsession on the world. The paranoiac is a man or a woman who can't see the reality of the world, but always a world which is reflecting his own obsession and desire and very violent pulsions. And so this answer was what the surrealism was expecting at that time. And paranoia critique become this dialogue between the obsession and the world. And it was why Dali was, for a couple of years, the central figure of surrealism, not only because of his work, but through the ideas he brought to the movement.
Are there any other questions? If you could help me pass that along.
Thank you very much for the presentation. And I'd just like to ask, is there any recording of what Masson thought of cinema and photography as a vehicle for surrealism?
No. He was a close friend for a while with Élie Lothar, so we are sure of that. They went together to les abattoirs and made some photos just after that. But Masson never used photos, as I know. And cinema, no, was not that interested. And we know quite precisely what was his interest, because there is now a publication which has been done a couple of months ago, Le Catalogue Raisonné, which is an extended study and survey of his work, and there is no traces of his possible interest for photo or cinema, no.
It's interesting, such an influential form, and must have been a very conscious decision to choose painting to continue to make statements.
Yeah, but as I try to say, he was one of the most painter of the group, painter in a very traditional and in a very modern way, which is utopian, because this is typically the modern conception of art, of painting, is to change the world in a way.
Was there any reconciliation with Breton?
They traveled together. First of all, the first dissension appeared in 1928, precisely at the time where Breton gets involved in the Communist Party. And as I quote Masson, he didn't want to be involved with any party. In fact, he was a real anarchist all his life long. Refusal all organization, political organization. Then he was very close friend to Bataille. He was not only in affinity with his ideas, but he was also family related with him, because he married. He had a connection through his family with Bataille. And in 1937, Bataille and Breton worked again together in a political movement which was called Contre-Attaque, and it was driven against the rise of fascism in France. For a while, they reconciled themselves, and after that, they broke again, and they found themselves again after the Second World War. It's a long and more complex story than the one we used to tell about this relation. It's more complementary people, I think, that really opposed people. But the reconciliation with André Breton came during the Second World War by random. Masson and Breton was in the same boat coming from Marseille to the US. And this boat made a stop in La Martinique, where, of course, on the boat they became friends again. They evoked the old time, and finally they found that they had never changed one and another, and they made together a book, Martinique charmeuse de serpent, which was a text by Breton and illustration by Masson. And so during the first years of their exile in the US, they were friends again, and they clashed again when suddenly André Masson decided to paint a large canvas to a representation, a kind of theater representation given by the La France Libre, the French people fighting against the government of Vichy. There was a kind of resistance in the US, and Masson had sympathy for them and decided to work with them. And Breton disagreed with that. And he didn't want to be part of this engagement, and so they broke again their relation.
Thank you.